In today's episode, I'll show you how I bake bread, while also taking a closer look at it under the microscope at different stages. Let's start with bread itself. It seems very simple: flour, water, yeast, and salt. Yeast plays the most important role here. These are living organisms, specifically single-celled fungi. When they have access to sugars, they begin to break them down and, in the process, produce carbon dioxide. This gas is what makes the dough rise. We usually associate yeast with baking bread or making wine, but in reality, they can be found almost everywhere in nature. They live on the skins of fruits, on plant leaves, in soil, and even in the air. That's why fermentation can happen completely naturally, even without adding baker's yeast. Yeast is also a valuable source of vitamins and protein, which is why it is used not only in food, but also in cosmetics, for example, in products for hair and skincare. The first step in making bread is dissolving the yeast. I add 9 grams of yeast to about 450 milliliters of warm water and stir until it is completely dissolved. If we look at a sample like this under the microscope, we can see individual cells of baker's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. In just 1 gram of yeast, there can be as many as 25 billion cells. In plain water, however, nothing particularly interesting happens. The yeast is present, but it does not yet have access to an energy source. For comparison, I prepared a second sample. This time, I added a little sugar to the yeast. Yeast uses sugars and produces carbon dioxide, which makes bread rise and become fluffy. Yeast is used not only in baking, but also in brewing and winemaking, where it produces alcohol and aromatic compounds that give flavor and aroma. Interestingly, yeast strains are often closely guarded secrets among brewers. Even small details, such as fermentation temperature, can completely change the character of the final product. Bread also produces a small amount of alcohol, but it evaporates during baking. In my bread recipe, I do not add sugar, but the yeast still finds its source of energy. Flour contains a lot of starch, which yeast can break down into simpler sugars and use for fermentation. Now we move on to the second stage: preparing the dough. I add 640 grams of spelt flour type 720 to a bowl and mix in 2 teaspoons of salt. Then I pour in the water with the dissolved yeast and mix everything until a smooth dough forms. I definitely recommend using a regular spoon. A whisk is really a terrible idea in this case. I leave the prepared dough to rest for about 1 to 2 hours. During this time, the yeast starts working and produces carbon dioxide. The gas becomes trapped in the dough, causing its volume to gradually increase. If we look at flour under the microscope, we can see a large number of starch granules. They look especially impressive under polarized light, where the granules change color and shimmer depending on the angle of the light. This starch is what provides the yeast with energy for fermentation. Additionally, if we add iodine to flour, we can observe a color reaction. The starch combines with the iodine to form characteristic dark blue or dark purple complexes. Once the dough has risen, I transfer it onto a work surface and shape it into a loaf. Then I place it into a greased oven-safe dish, cover it, and put it into a cold oven. I bake the bread for about an hour at 240 degrees Celsius. For the last 10 minutes, I remove the lid so the crust becomes golden and crispy. If anyone would like to bake the same bread, here is the recipe: 450 grams warm water, 9 grams fresh yeast, 640 grams spelt flour type 720, 2 teaspoons of salt. And that's how, step by step, a delicious homemade loaf of bread comes together. Fresh-smelling, soft and fluffy on the inside, with a crispy crust on the outside. Enjoy! If you found the topic of bread interesting, check out my other video where I talk more about starch. You'll learn why bread starts to taste sweeter the longer you chew it. See you under the microscope.